The night Princess Valeth Khorasan lost. Everything started with the sound of breaking glass and ended with blood on marble floors that had stood clean for 1,000 years. She remembered running through the crystal corridors of the imperial palace, her bare feet slapping against cold stone as gods who had sworn to protect her now chased her with weapons drawn. She remembered the screams of servants who tried to help her and paid for their loyalty with their lives. She remembered her father's face frozen in death, his crown stolen from his still warm head by her half-brother Draxon. The Estendari Empire stretched across 40 star systems, and the Khorasan dynasty had ruled it for generations beyond counting. Veith had been raised to believe she would one day sit upon the throne of stars and guide her people into a new era of prosperity. She has studied warfare and diplomacy, and science and art. She had prepared her entire life for the burden of leadership. None of that mattered now. Draxon had planned his betrayal perfectly. He had spent years placing his supporters in key positions throughout the military and the court. He had whispered lies about Vale to anyone who would listen. He had painted her as weak and unfit to rule, and when the moment came, he struck without mercy or warning. The official story spread across the empire within hours. Princess Valeth had murdered her own father in a mad grab for power, and the loyal prince Denon had stopped her just in time. The people believed it because they had no reason not to. The evidence had been manufactured with expert care. Witnesses had been bribed or threatened or killed. Vale was captured trying to reach a ship that might have carried her to safety. She fought like a wild animal, but there were too many soldiers and she was alone. They beat her until she could no longer stand, and then they dragged her before her brother. Draxon sat upon their father's throne as if he had been born to it. His silver skin gleamed in the palace lights, and his forehead held nothing but cold satisfaction. He looked down at his bleeding sister and smiled. "You should thank me," he said in a voice smooth as poison. "I could have you executed publicly, but I'm not without mercy. Instead, you will simply disappear. The galaxy is vast, dear sister, and there are places where even princesses can be forgotten." She spat at his feet and cursed his name and swore vengeance with every breath in her body. He only laughed. They sold her to slavers that very night. She was transported off-world in chains, her identity stripped away, her royal robes replaced with rags. She became cargo, merchandise, a product to be bought and sold like any common beast. The slavers recognized her value immediately. Fallen royalty always fetched premium prices in the right markets. There were collectors who would pay fortunes for an Ostendori princess, and there were fighting pits that would pay even more for the spectacle of watching one die. Crucible Station was the most infamous arena complex in the outer territories. It orbited a dying red star, a massive structure built from the wreckage of 100 conquered warships. Criminals and warlords and wealthy sadists came from across the galaxy to watch beings fight and die for their entertainment. Vale arrived in a transport packed with other prisoners. She was processed like an animal, scanned and catalogued and branded with a number. Her name no longer mattered. Her lineage meant nothing. She was Fighter 7749, property of the Arena Masters. The holding cells beneath the arena were dark and cold and filled with the stench of fear. Lilith found a corner and curled into it, her body still aching. From the beatings, her mind still reeling from the betrayal. She had never felt so alone in all her life. Days passed in that darkness. She learned the rhythms of the arena, the roar of the crowd above, the screams of fighters being dragged to their deaths. She watched other prisoners break down and weep or go mad with terror. She forced herself to remain calm, to think, to plan, but what plan could save her now? She was a princess without a kingdom, a warrior without weapons, a leader without followers. Draxen had taken everything from her, and she was powerless to stop him. It was on her seventh day in the cells that she first noticed the human. He was in a cage. Across from hers, a creature she had only ever seen in educational displays and dismissive reports from the galactic. Conquered humans were considered a primitive species barely worth notice. Their home world, a minor planet called Earth in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy, the Ashendari had never bothered to make formal contact with them. This human was different from anything she had expected. He was smaller than Anastasian Dari, with only 2 eyes and strange soft skin in a shade of brown. His body was covered in scars, dozens of them, more than any being should be able to survive. He sat perfectly still in his cage, watching everything with quiet intensity. The guards feared him. They could see it in the way they approached his cage, always in groups, always with weapons ready. They spoke about him in hushed whispers, calling him the survivor and the one who won't die. His name was Marcus Cole, and he had been fighting in the arena for over a year. No one survived the arena for a year. The fights were designed to kill, to entertain the crowds with blood and death. The average fighter lasted 3 matches at most. Marcus had 147. Vase studied him whenever she could. She watched how he moved, how he conserved his energy, how he seemed to be calculating something even when he appeared to be resting. There was a sharpness in his eyes that reminded her of the generals who had served her father. On her 10th day, the arena masters came for her. They dragged her from her cell and threw her into preparation room, where they fitted her with basic armor and handed her a dull blade. She demanded to know what was happening, but they only laughed. "Tonight you fight," one of them said, with cruel amusement. "The crowds have been promised a princess, and we always deliver what we promise." They pushed her through a gate, and suddenly she was standing in the arena itself. The noise was overwhelming. Thousands of spectators screaming for blood, lights blazing down from above. The floor beneath her feet stained dark from countless battles. Across from her, 3 gates opened and 3 Rothian beasts emerged. Rothians were predators from a death world, massive creatures with armored hides and claws that could tear through metal. They were not intelligent, just hungry and violent, and nearly impossible to kill. Even a trained warrior with proper weapons would struggle against one. They had given her 3. Vale raised her dull blade and prepared to die with whatever dignity she had left. She would not beg. She would not run. She would face her death as a princess of the Coruscant dynasty. The beasts charged, and then something impossible happened. A figure dropped from above, landing between Vale and the attacking creatures. It was the human. Marcus Cole escaped from his cage. Somehow he held no weapon, just his bare hands and a look of absolute determination. "What are you doing?" Lilith shouted over the roar of the crowd. He glanced back at her and smiled a strange expression that seemed completely out of place in this moment of certain death. "You look like you could use a friend," he said simply, then he turned to face the monsters and the fight began. The fight against the three Varathan beasts lasted less than 10 minutes, but to Valith it felt like a lifetime. She had trained with the finest warriors in the Ascendary Empire, had learned combat techniques passed down through royal generations, had studied the art of battle since she could walk, but nothing had prepared her for fighting alongside a human. Marcus moved like no creature she had ever seen. He was not faster than the beasts, not stronger, not better armored by every measure that mattered. He should have died in the first 30 seconds, but he refused to fall. The first Rathian slammed into him and sent him flying across the arena. He hit the wall hard enough to crack the stone, hard enough to kill any Ashen Dari, but he got up immediately, blood shining from his head, and charged right back into the fight. Valith used the distraction to drive her blade into the weak point beneath the creature's arm. It screamed and turned on her. She barely dodged its claws. Marcus tackled it from behind and wrapped his arms around its throat. "The eyes," he shouted while the beast thrashed and tried to throw him off. "Go for the eyes." She drove her blade upward and felt it sink into something soft. The Vroyan collapsed and Marcus rolled free just before its massive body crushed him. Two remained. They fought together as if they had trained for years. When one attacked, the other provided distraction. When one was wounded, the other covered their retreat. The crowd went wild, screaming with excitement at the unexpected spectacle. Marcus took terrible punishment. His left arm hung broken at his side. His ribs were clearly shattered. Blood poured from a dozen wounds. Any other being would have collapsed long ago, but he kept fighting. With his one good arm, kept moving, kept refusing to die. Valith killed the second beast with a desperate strike that opened her own shoulder to the claws of the third. The pain was blinding, but she heard Marcus scream her name and knew she could not stop. The final Varoth was wounded and angry and desperate. It cornered Marcus against the arena wall and prepared to tear him apart. Valith leaped onto its back and drove her blade down through its skull with every bit of strength she had left. The creature fell. The crowd exploded with noise, but Valith barely heard them. She dropped to her knees beside Marcus, who lay in a spreading pool of his own blood. His eyes were unfocused, his breathing shallow. He looked like a corpse that had not yet realized it was dead. "Why?" she demanded, pressing her hands against his worst wound. "Why did you do that? You could have stayed safe in your cage. You could have let me die. We're strangers." He coughed, and something like a laugh escaped his broken body. "Didn't feel right," he managed to say, "watching them throw you to the wolves. Couldn't just sit there." The arena guards arrived then and expected them to execute Marcus for his unauthorized entry into the fight. Instead, they carried him to the medical bay with something that almost looked like respect. The crowd had loved the show. The arena masters saw profit in keeping both fighters alive, for now they would survive. Weeks passed in the depths of Crucible Station, and Valith found herself spending more and more time with the human. They shared a larger cell now, reward for their performance, and they used the time to talk and train and plan. She learned about Earth, about humans, about the culture that had shaped Marcus into the warrior he was. She had always been taught that humans were primitive, barely worth consideration, a young species still crawling out of their own barbarism. The reality was far more complicated. Humans were strange. They formed bonds with other species, with animals, with machines, with anything that showed them kindness. They had a word for it that did not translate well into the Astrandari language. Pack bonding. They were also impossibly stubborn. Their bodies healed from injuries that would kill other species. They kept fighting long after logic said they should surrender. Their history was full of stories about individuals who achieved the impossible simply because they refused to accept defeat. But the strangest thing about humans was their concept of loyalty. Vale had grown up in a royal court where every alliance was temporary, where every friendship was a calculation of mutual benefit, where betrayal was not a crime but simply move in an endless game of power. Her own brother had murdered their father without hesitation when it served his interest. Marcus did not think this way. He stayed by her side even though she could offer him nothing. He protected her even when it put his own life at risk. He shared his food when they were hungry and his warmth when they were cold. He treated her wounds with gentle hands and never asked for anything in return. I do not understand you, Valith admitted one night as they sat in their shared cell. In my world, loyalty is purchased with wealth or power. I have neither. Why you stay with me? Marcus thought about it for a long moment before answering. On Earth we have this idea that people matter more than things. When someone becomes part of your circle, part of your family, you protect them no matter what. It's not about what they can give you, it's about who they are. But we only just met, she protested. How can I be part of your family? He shrugged, a very human gesture that she was learning to read. You needed help and I can help. That was enough. Now we've bled together, fought together, survived together. In my book, that makes us family. The concept was so foreign to everything she knew that Vale did not know how to respond. She had spent her whole life surrounded by people who smiled to her face while plotting her downfall. The idea that someone could simply choose to be loyal, choose to care, choose to sacrifice without expectation of reward was almost impossible to believe. But Marcus proved it again and again in the weeks that followed. When the arena masters tried to separate them, he fought until they relented. When other prisoners targeted Valith for her royal blood, he stood as her guardian. When she fell sick from a wound infection, he stayed awake for 3 days straight, cooling her fever and forcing her to drink water. Slowly, other prisoners began to notice. There was a Kelari named Voss, who had been broken by the arena, reduced to a trembling shadow of himself. Marcus spent hours talking to him, rebuilding his courage, reminding him of his own strength. Within a month, Voss was standing tall again, ready to fight. There was a Sinandori engineer named Ta who had given up all hope of escape. Vale used her royal education to analyze the station security systems, while Marcus helped Ta remember her skills. Together they began mapping weaknesses in the arena's defenses. More came. A disgraced Morthani soldier, a former pilot from a species did not recognize, a pair of twins who spoke a language no translator could decipher. They gathered around Marcus and Valith like moths drawn to flame. What are we Doing, Valith asked one night as their group grew to nearly 20. We cannot fight the entire station, Marcus smiled. That strange human smile that she was learning to trust. Not yet, he agreed. But we're building something, an army. Your army, when the time is right, we'll be ready. Ready for what? His eyes went hard. To take back what they stole from you, your throne, your crown, your name. And then we'll make your brother pay for what he did. For the first time since her capture, Vale felt something she thought she had lost forever. She felt hope. The news arrived on a smuggler's data chip hidden inside a supply crate and passed from hand to hand until it reached the fighting pits of Crucible Station. Vale read the message 3 times before she could accept what it said. Her hands trembled as she passed it to Marcus. His face went cold as stone as he absorbed the words. Prince Draxon had signed a treaty with the Dominion of Scar. The Scar were the most feared slavers in the galaxy, a brutal empire that had consumed entire civilizations and turned their populations into property. They had been pushing against Ascendari borders for decades, held back only by the strength of the Imperial fleet. But Draxon had changed everything. In exchange for Scar support in crushing any remaining opposition to his rule, he had agreed to open new territories for Scar expansion. He had given them hunting rights in neutral space, and the first targets on the list were the human colonies. Your brother is going to enslave my people, Marcus said quietly, his voice flat and dangerous. He's going to let the Scar raid Earth's outposts. They'll take millions. Vale felt shame wash over her. She had not known that Draxon would go this far. She had underestimated his cruelty and his ambition. Now innocent beings would suffer because she had failed to stop him. I am sorry, she said, the words feeling hollow and inadequate. I did not know he would. This isn't your fault, Marcus cut her off. This is his choice, his evil. But we're going to stop him. She looked at their ragged band of fighters, barely 30 strong, hiding in the belly of a slave arena. How we have nothing, no ships, no weapons, no army. Draxon controls the entire empire. Marcus stood up and walked to the small window that looked out at the dying star beyond. His reflection stared back at him, covered in scars, missing 2 fingers on his left hand, aged beyond his years by suffering. I was going to help you take back your throne because it was the right thing to do, he said slowly. Because you didn't deserve what happened to you, because no one should have their life stolen by a traitor. He turned to face her, and something in his eyes had changed. There was fire there. Now a cold and terrible fire. Now it's personal, he continued. Now your brother has made himself my enemy, and where I come from we have a saying, never pick a fight with a human unless you're ready to finish it. What do you mean? Humans don't just fight to win, Marcus explained. We fight because fighting is what we are. Our ancestors survived on a world that tried to kill them every day. They chased prey until it dropped from exhaustion. They kept getting up no matter how many times they were knocked down. We call it the doctrine of spite. Vale had heard of this human trait. Persistence hunting. Her educators had called it the ability to outlast any opponent through sheer stubborn endurance. She had dismissed it as primitive. She was not dismissing it anymore. Draxon thinks he's won, Marcus said. He thinks sitting on that throne makes him safe. He has no idea what's coming for him. The escape from Crucible Station happened 3 weeks later. Marcus had trained their group in human tactics, guerrilla warfare, improvise, weapons, psychological operations. They struck fast and hard, targeting the station's power grid and communication system. By the time the arena masters realized what was happening, the prisoners were already flooding the corridors. Vale led the assault on the docking bay, while Marcus secured their escape route. Voss and Ta fought alongside her, no longer broken prisoners but warriors reborn. They moved with deadly precision, overwhelming guards who expected frightened slaves and found an army. Instead, they captured a Cranthi transport ship, a vessel large enough to carry all 30 of them with room to spare. Marcus piloted it himself, having learned the controls from Taya during weeks of secret lessons. They burned away from Crucible Station as alarms screamed behind them, but Vale was not finished. Before they jumped to hyperspace, she activated the station's broadcast system using codes she had memorized from her days as a princess. Her face appeared on every screen in the arena. Her voice echoed through every speaker. "This is Valith Coruscant, true heir to the throne of stars," she announced to the stunned audience. "The user Draxon murdered my father and stole my birthright. He now sells our people to the Scar for his own power. I have escaped his prisons and I'm coming for him." She paused, letting the words sink in. "To all who remember their oath to my father, to all who know that Draxon's rule brings only darkness, I say this. Rise, join me. The fight for our empire begins now." The message spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Within days, responses began arriving through hidden channels. Loyalist officers who had been forced into silence, noble families who had lost loved ones to Dratton's purges, common citizens who remembered the old Emperor's justice. They reached out with offers of support, of shelter, of ships and weapons, but the most surprising response came from Earth. Human intelligence services had intercepted the broadcast and traced it to its source. They had also learned of Draxon's treaty with the Scar. They understood what was at stake. A message arrived encrypted with military-grade codes. It was short and direct, the way humans often were. "We know about the Scar deal. We know about you. Earth Central Command is prepared to offer covert support. Meet our representative at the following coordinates. Come alone or bring whoever you trust. We have resources you need." Marcus read the message with a grim smile. "Looks like my people are paying attention. Can we trust them?" Vale asked. "I know nothing of human politics. They could be setting a trap. Earth doesn't make friends easily." Marcus replied. "We've been burned too many times by alien species who saw us as prey, but when we commit to something, we commit completely. If they're offering help, they mean it." They traveled to the meeting point, a dead moon and an abandoned star system. There they found a single human vessel waiting, a sleek warship that looked far more advanced than anything Vale had expected from a species her people called primitive. The human representative was a woman named Director Chun, sharp-eyed and silver-haired, with a cybernetic arm that hummed with hidden weapons. She studied Vale for a long moment before speaking. "Draxon made a mistake when he targeted human colonies," Director Chun said bluntly. "Earth has decided to correct that mistake. We're offering you intelligence, weapons, and tactical support in return. When you take your throne back, you recognize humanity as equals in galactic affairs, Vale did not hesitate, agreed. Director Chun nodded and extended her human hand, then, "Welcome to the Alliance, Princess. Let's go burn your brother's empire to the ground." Velith clasped the offered hand and felt the strength in it. The war for the future had begun. The battle for the extenderary throne began above the sacred world of Ash, Coral, where every emperor for 1,000 generations had been crowned. Draxon had fortified the system with everything he had. 300 warships formed a defensive sphere around the planet. Scar dreadnoughts added their firepower to the blockade. Orbital defense platforms bristled with weapons capable of destroying moons. Against this, Valeth commanded a loyalist fleet of 90 vessels. Most were outdated ships crewed by desperate volunteers. They were outgunned and outnumbered 3-1. But they had something Draxon did not expect. Humans. Director Chun had provided more than just weapons and intelligence. She had sent advisors, specialists, and a single company of Earth's most elite soldiers, 43 humans who had volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. Marcus would lead them personally. The orbital defenses are tied to a central shield nexus on the planet's surface, Vale explained during the final briefing. As long as it operates, our fleet cannot get close enough to land troops. We must take it down. That nexus is inside the Imperial Palace, Voss observed grimly. Draxon has 5,000 of his best soldiers guarding it. No force could fight through that conventional force. No, Marcus agreed. But we're not going to fight through them. We're going to go around them, under them, through their walls and ceilings. We're going to hit them from every direction they don't expect. The Ashindari commanders looked skeptical. The human tactics Marcus described seemed chaotic and undisciplined to minds trained in order battle formations. But Vale had learned to trust Marcus, and she gave the order. The assault began at dawn. Vale led the fleet in a direct attack on the Scar dreadnoughts, a bold charge that demanded every enemy eye turned toward the sky. Explosions lit the void as ships died on both sides. The Loyalist fleet fought with desperate courage, knowing they could not win, but determined to buy time. Meanwhile, Marcus and his humans descended to the planet's surface in stealth pods designed by Earth's engineers. They landed scattered across 20 km, each team member alone and far from help. They moved through the wilderness toward the palace. Ghosts in the undergrowth. The palace defenders never saw them coming. The first strike took out the external sensor grid. Guards stationed at outposts simply vanished, their bodies hidden, their weapons taken. By the time anyone noticed, the sensors were offline. The humans had already breached the outer walls. Marcus led his team through service tunnels and maintenance shafts, pathways that extendary soldiers considered beneath their dignity to guard. They crawled through spaces barely wide enough for a human body. They climbed vertical passages using nothing but strength and determination. They moved in absolute silence. The defenders began a panic when they realized something was wrong. Soldiers reported strange sounds in the walls. Officers failed to respond to communications. Equipment malfunctioned without explanation. Fear spread through the ranks like poison. Humans. One commander reported to Draxon, his voice shaking. "There are humans in the palace. We don't know how many. They're everywhere and Nowhere Draxon dismissed the fear as cowardice. How could a handful of primitives threaten 5,000 elite warriors? In a fortified position, he ordered his soldiers to hold their posts and stop spreading ridiculous rumors. It was the last mistake he would make. Marcus reached the Shield Nexus control room. With only 12 of his original 43, the others were scattered throughout the palace, causing chaos and drawing defenders away from the primary target. 3 had died in the infiltration. The rest would hold their positions or die trying. The control room was guarded by 200 soldiers in a reinforced bunker. There was no way to sneak past them. There was no way to trick them. There was only one option. Marcus looked at his remaining team, humans covered in blood and dirt and burn marks, exhausted beyond any reasonable limit, running on nothing but adrenaline and spite. This is it, he said quietly. No more sneaking, no more hiding. We go straight through them. Some of us won't make it. Probably most of us, but the ones who do will finish the job. No one argued. No one hesitated. They checked their weapons one final time and prepared to attack. The charge was suicidal madness. 12 beings against 200. Any military strategist would have called it impossible. Any rational creature would have surrendered. Humans were not rational creatures. They burst into the corridor screaming battle cries from a dozen different Earth cultures. They fired as they ran, never stopping, never taking cover. Soldiers fell before them, but more soldiers fired back. Plasma bolts tore through human bodies. Marcus took a hit to the chest that should have killed him instantly. The blast burned through armor and flesh and exposed his ribs to the air. He did not stop. He grabbed a fallen soldier's weapon and kept shooting with his good arm. Tova, a human woman who had grown up on a mining colony, lost both legs to an explosion. She dragged herself forward on her arms, detonating grenades until she ran out. Sergeant Park charged into a group of 30 soldiers with nothing but a combat knife. He killed 8 before they brought him down, and his final act was throwing that knife into the eye of their commander. One by one the humans fell, but they took 5 enemies for every one of them that died, and they kept pushing forward, kept closing the distance, kept refusing to accept what every rule of war said was certain defeat. Marcus reached the control room door with only himself and 2 others still standing. Behind them lay nearly 100 dead defenders. The corridor was painted red with blood from both sides. The door was sealed. 2 ft of reinforced metal stood between them and their objective. There was no time to hack it, no explosives left to breach it. Marcus looked at the wound in his chest, felt his life pouring out of him, and made a decision. He grabbed a plasma cutter from his belt, a tool meant for emergency repairs, and pressed it against his own wound. The pain was beyond description. The smell of burning flesh filled his nostrils, but the bleeding stopped. Move, he ordered the others. Together they used the plasma cutters to burn through the door. It took 4 agonizing minutes. Defenders pounded on the corridor barriers behind them. Marcus's vision swam and blurred. The door fell. Inside, technicians scrambled away from their posts. Marcus shot them without hesitation, then staggered to the main console. His training with Taya had taught him what to look for. His fingers found the right sequence. The shields went down above the planet. Vale saw the energy barriers flicker and die. Her fleet surged forward, breaking through the now undefended orbital platforms. Transports loaded with loyalist soldiers descended toward the palace. Draxon's voice crackled over an open channel, screaming orders that no one was following anymore. The Nexus has fallen. Vale announced to her fleet, all forces advance. Today we take back our empire. She piloted her command shuttle, personally diving through enemy fire to reach the palace landing pad. Behind her came thousands of loyal soldiers. Ashendari, who had waited for this moment since the night of the coup, when she reached the shield Nexus control room, she found Marcus collapsed against the console, barely conscious, surrounded by the bodies of the fallen. Shields are down, he managed to say, blood bubbling at his lips. The rest is yours, princess. Vale caught him as he fell, holding the human who had given everything for her cause. Get him to medical immediately, she ordered. If he dies, I will hold you all responsible. Then she drew her blade and went to find her brother. Valeth found Draxon in their father's throne room, surrounded by the last of his personal guards. The user sat upon the throne of stars as if it belonged to him. Even now, even as his empire crumbled around him, his silver face was twisted with rage and disbelief. He had been so certain of his victory, so confident that his sister would never escape the pits where he had sent her to die. How? He demanded as Valeth strode into the chamber, loyalist soldiers at her back. How is this possible? You were nothing, a disgraced princess sold to slavers. You had no allies, no resources, no hope. I had something better, Balis replied, her blade steady in her hand. I had a human. Draxon's guards raised their weapons, but they were outnumbered and outflanked. One by one they lowered their arms and stepped aside. Loyalty purchased with fear rarely lasted when the fear pointed both directions. You would let primitives into our sacred halls, Draxon spat. You would ally with animals who can barely travel between stars. Our ancestors conquered galaxies while humans were still living in caves. And yet those primitives accomplished what your 5,000 elite soldiers could not prevent. Balith answered. They brought down your shields, broke your defenses, and delivered you into my hands. Perhaps our ancestors were wrong about what makes a species worthy. She advanced until she stood at the foot of the throne, looking up at the brother who had murdered their father and destroyed her life. You have a choice, she said. Surrender and face trial for your crimes, or resist and die here. Draxon laughed, a bitter and broken sound. Trial, so you can make a spectacle of my death for the masses. So you can pretend to be merciful while you destroy everything I built. No, sister, I think not. He moved faster than she expected, drawing a hidden blade and lunging from the throne. Even now, even defeated, he would rather die fighting than admit defeat. Velith met his attack with the skill she had honed in the fighting pits. She parried his first strike, deflected his second, and drove her blade through his chest with the third. It was over in seconds. Draxon looked down at the sword buried in his heart, then up at his sister's face. Something that might have been surprise flickered in his 4 eyes. The pits made you stronger, he whispered. No, Vale replied. The human made me better. Draxon collapsed at the foot of the throne he had stolen, and his reign of tyranny ended. The coronation of Empress Valeth Korishan took place 1 month Later, after the Scar forces had been driven from a Shandari space and order had been restored to the Empire, it was the largest gathering in the history of Ashao. Representatives from every loyal world attended. Former enemies came seeking mercy, neutral powers came seeking advantage. The entire galaxy watched as the rightful heir finally claimed her birthright, but it was her first decree that shocked everyone. I stand before you as Empress, Balith announced from the throne of stars, but I do not stand alone. I would not be here without the alliance that made my victory possible. I would not be alive without the loyalty of those who fought beside me when I had nothing to offer them. While for them she turned to the delegation from Earth, where Director Chen stood with a small group of human officials. On this day I declare humanity to be full and equal members of the galactic conquered. Vale proclaimed, their world shall be protected under a Shandari treaty. Their representatives shall have voice in all matters of galactic governance. Any attack against human territories shall be considered an attack against the Empire itself. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Number young species had ever been granted such status. It went against centuries of tradition and hierarchy. But Valif was not finished. I further establish what shall be known as the Cole Doctrine, she continued, named for the human who stood beside me in my darkest hour. This doctrine formally integrates human military advisors into the imperial command structure. It recognizes that humanity's unique approach to warfare and loyalty offers lessons that all species would be wise to learn. Director Chun stepped forward and bowed. On behalf of Earth and all human colonies, we accept this alliance and pledge our support to Empress Malith and the Shandari people. Together, we will build something the galaxy has never seen before. In the medical bay of the palace, Marcus watched the ceremony on a screen beside his recovery bed. He had spent 3 weeks in a healing tank, his body so damaged that Shandari doctors had initially declared him beyond saving. But humans were stubborn, and Marcus was more stubborn than most. He had clung to life with the same determination that had carried him through 47 arena fights and a suicidal assault on a fortified palace. The door opened and Vale entered, still wearing her carnation robes. She sat beside his bed and studied his face for a long moment. You almost died, she said. Almost doesn't count, Marcus replied with a weak smile. I could give you anything, she continued. Lands, titles, wealth beyond imagination. You are a hero to my people now. They would accept whatever honors I chose to grant you. Marcus shook his head slowly. I told you before I didn't do this for rewards. I did it because it was right. I did it because you're my friend. I did it because your brother needed to be stopped. Ben, what do you want? Velith asked. Surely there is something. He thought about it for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, while his damaged body slowly healed. Ship, he said finally, a crew and something to protect. That's all I've ever wanted. If smiled and clasped his hand, then you shall have them. I am commissioning a new vessel, a hybrid, designed with both human and a Shandari technology. It will be called the Defiance, and you will be its captain. What will be its mission? To patrol the border territories, she explained, to show the galaxy that humans and a Shandari stand together, to remind anyone who might threaten either of our peoples that some alliances cannot be. Broken, Marcus nodded slowly. I can work. With that, months later, the Defiance launched from the orbital shipyards above Ash Coral. It was a beautiful vessel, sleek and powerful, crewed by humans and a Stendarr working side by side. Captain Marcus Cole stood on the bridge looking out at the stars through the main viewport. His body still bore the scars of everything he had survived, but his spirit was stronger than ever. Behind him, his crew worked with quiet efficiency. Beside him, his first officer, a young Ashendari named Kor, who had fought at Crucible Station, monitored the ship's systems. A message arrived from the Empress herself. Safe travels, old friend. May you find the peace you have earned, and may the galaxy remember that humanity stood with us when no one else would. Marcus smiled and opened a channel to the crew. All hands, this is the captain. We are cleared for departure. Our mission is to patrol, to protect, and to remind everyone who sees us what happens when humans and Ashtandari fight together. The Defiance accelerated toward the stars, carrying its message of alliance and strength to every corner of the galaxy and throughout known space. New understanding began to spread. Humans were no longer primitives to be dismissed. They were allies worth having, friends worth trusting, and enemies no one could afford to make. Galaxy had changed forever, and it had all started with a spurned princess and a human fighter who refused to look away.